Over the years, there have been lots of discussions back and forth on whether it's truly necessary to back up the data you have in Microsoft 365. However, with the announcement of Microsoft releasing its own backup tool for Microsoft 365 at some point in the future, to some degree this debate is over. One of the solutions I've seen mentioned as a really great fit for smaller businesses, but I've never had a chance to try, is with a feature that's built into some of Synology's NAS products. So in this video, I'm going to look at Microsoft 365 Backup for the uninitiated. Thinking of some of the small businesses I've worked with who have minimal IT help, for whom a product like Synology's might be an attractive option for several reasons we'll cover, and find out if it really should be that attractive after all. If you're not familiar with Synology, they're a company that specialises in NAS or network attached storage devices. A NAS is just a specialised computer designed to house lots of storage, to be accessible on a network, and has specialised software to help you imagine it. You could build your own NAS using off-the-shelf hardware and software solutions like TrueNAS, or you could even use a Windows PC as a NAS if you chose. But in going with a specialised vendor like Synology, which we're looking at today, or competitors like QNAP or TerraMaster, you get bundled software for managing your NAS that helps you to efficiently do things like share files, do backups, and even more complex tasks like running virtual machines or recording security cameras. There are lots of very good YouTube channels that specialise in NAS related content, so I'm going to leave any deep dive of NAS tech generally to them and focus mostly on the feature I want to talk about here, the Microsoft 365 Backup from Synology. Within its software, Synology has a tool called Active Backup for Microsoft 365, and they have an equivalent tool for Google Workspace too. And this allows you to do backups of your Microsoft 365 tenants to the Synology device itself. The big selling point of a solution like this is that unlike cloud-based backups, once you purchase the hardware, there are no recurring fees for your backups. So particularly if you need a NAS for some other purpose anyway, this can be a really cost-effective solution. But the thing with backup is the sticker price shouldn't be all you look at. They say you get what you pay for, and with backup, finding out you paid for too little is a little like only finding out you were underinsured after that big storm came through. If content like this is useful to you, please do remember to hit the like button so we can share it with as many interested people as possible. And if you want to see more like this, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you know as soon as I release another video. Also, if there are people in your wider network who might be interested in content like this, please do consider sharing it there too. Thanks. So let's take a moment to talk about backups generally and Microsoft 365 Backup specifically. The traditional approach to backup is the 3-2-1 approach, where you want 3 copies of your data spread across 2 different types of media, with one being off-site from where the rest of your data is housed. So you might have 1 copy on your laptop, 1 copy on an external hard drive, and a 3rd copy in the cloud, for example. So if right now you don't have any Microsoft 365 backup solution, but all your data is housed in your tenant, then you aren't really hitting this criteria. But you're probably thinking, but the thing is, Nick, we do sync our data between our PCs and OneDrive, so that's 2 copies at least. Well, yes and no. Synced files, and particularly known folder sync, which pushes things like files on your desktop into the cloud, is far better than nothing. But it isn't a robust backup solution. On the surface, a file sync and a backup do the same thing. They establish a copy of the data in 2 or more places, but dig beneath the surface and there are big differences. It's possible with file syncing that you just end up with the same problem everywhere instead of a backup. But with good backups that provide an ongoing historic state of known good files, you can rewind before the problem occurred. If you've ever used the Time Machine backup tool on a Mac, this is one of the best visual representations of how this works. The right backup solution is something that will be somewhat unique to you. Depending on what you do, why you need to keep your data, and how much of it there is, you might approach backup differently. In my case, the reason I've been playing around with Synology's products actually has nothing to do with Microsoft 365. My storage needs related to video creation have outgrown my existing NAS device, and these are files that are so big, and there's so many of them, that it's not really practical to use them directly from Microsoft 365 storage anyway. For your business, you might have everything in Microsoft 365, or there might be data or apps that live elsewhere that you need to think about separately. With any backup, you need to ensure you know what is being backed up and check you are capturing the information you need and that you know how to restore it. A comprehensive backup plan includes more than just capturing the data. You need to know you can do something useful with what has been captured that mitigates whatever risk you were trying to avoid in the first place. One of the most common steps at which you find your backup strategy is failed is when you come to restore a file you thought you were backing up, and that really isn't a good feeling for anyone involved. So I've never featured hardware in my videos before, but given that some viewers may have little concept of what a NAS device is, let's look briefly at this. The Synology device I selected is the DS1522 Plus. It's a 5-bay desktop NAS that's aimed at small businesses. The Active Backup for Microsoft 365 doesn't work on all of Synology's devices, but you can get much smaller or much larger ones that it's compatible with depending on what you need. And when I say much smaller or much larger, I mainly am concerned with how many drives it can fit out of the box and how many it can expand to. They start at 2 drives, so just 2 of these, or go up from there to many, many more. In this case, this can fit 5 in the actual box itself, and then 10 more through expansion. The device itself comes bare, meaning that you have to add your own drives. This means that you can configure it to provide a variety of amounts of storage and resiliency, but also means that depending on what configuration you select, the Synology box itself can be only a fraction of the total cost of getting it up and running. The mention of resiliency refers to a technology built into these devices called RAID, or Redundant Array of Inexpensive Disks, that allows you to configure it so that one or more drive can fail without having any impact on your data. This isn't the same as backup and clearly doesn't protect your data against other hardware failures or fires or floods or thefts. And it also means that depending on how many drives you have in your device, you don't get the capacity of all of those drives. For example, if I was to set up this device with 5 drives in it, but I selected to have 2 of them there for RAID resiliency, then I would only get the capacity of 3 of my drives in total. So just bear that in mind when you're purchasing drives and the total cost of acquiring and running the device. For the purposes of our demo, I've just installed a single 2TB NAS drive to get it up and running. What you'd need in terms of storage depends on what you need to store. However, if you're dealing with large volumes of data in Microsoft 365, hundreds of gigabytes out of those 1TB per user quotas, you can quickly start to see how the overall cost of a device like this might be a lot cheaper than equivalent cloud-based storage of similar volumes over a number of years. Just go and take a look at cloud storage and particularly backup storage and see how much it's going to cost you. But as I said earlier, backup isn't something where your decision should be driven by the sticker price alone. So don't add one of these to your Amazon cart just yet. Keep watching to see whether this will work for you. So let's take a look at how Active Backup works. If you want a tutorial on how to set up a Synology from scratch, I'll provide some links to some resources below from other channels. As always, I do my demos in a simulation environment, and any data you see is either created for demo purposes or is publicly accessible. So once we're into the Synology, the first thing we're going to want to do is create somewhere where we're going to put our backup. So we're going to go to Control Panel, we're going to go to Shared Folder, and you can see there are no shares here. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a shared folder. We can just call this Backup. I'm going to go ahead and just click Next, Next, and you should look into how to set this up because there are options here. My focus here isn't how to set up the NAS itself. I just want to create somewhere to put my backup. And we're just going to apply that setting, and we now have somewhere where we can put our backup. So next we're going to go to the Package Center. Under All Packages, we're going to want to install Active Backup for Microsoft 365. And once that's installed, we're going to go ahead and open it. We need to activate the package using our Synology account. If you don't have a Synology account, you'll be prompted to create one here. And next, you'll be given the opportunity to create a backup task. So we're going to go ahead and create a task in Microsoft 365. and you're going to input a unique certificate password, which you're going to want to hold on to. We can then say next. It's going to ask us to log into Microsoft 365 with an appropriately privileged account. And then it's going to confirm that you want to give Synology Active Backup for Microsoft 365 the permissions that it requires. It has quite a lot of permissions here. It's able to read everything in your groups, in channel messages, access the directory, read all groups. So there's a lot of access that it's getting. And once you've agreed to that, you're going to agree that it's going to direct you back to your NAS. Just make sure that's the address of your NAS. And in the background, it's going to register the application in Azure Active Directory. So then you get the opportunity to download the certificate that you just created. We're going to put our backup in our backup folder. If you enable the Active Backup for Microsoft 365 Portal, what that lets you do is let people without admin privileges restore their backup items themselves if they need to. For the time being, I'm not going to go into that. So you can see here I'm using the latest version of this package which I've just installed. It's asking me to fill out a form to request access to my team's data. But if you jump over to this form, you'll see that actually as of May this year, I'm now recording this in October, this has not been the process. So there clearly is some lag between what Synology's process is and what's going on over at Microsoft. So let's continue on, and my understanding from Microsoft is that if this app is set up correctly, it should be able to access Teams data without getting that request, but we shall see. You can see it's now asking me what do I want it to back up automatically, and I'm just going to leave it by default backing up everything automatically. I'm just going to leave that as default for the time being. And then you can work out when you're going to back it up. Do you want it to be continuous? You can see as soon as something changes, it'll be backed up. Do you want it to be manual, or do you want a scheduled backup, in which case you can set a schedule. So I think for the time being, I'm just going to set this up as a manual process. And maybe I want to keep all versions of my files for retention purposes, and I think manual will just let me show how this works. So you can see we've got everything set up in there. We're going to click Done, and then it asks me, do I want to run the backup now? So let's say yes. And this is the tenant that I use for demo purposes, so there isn't a huge amount of data over there, so I'm not expecting this to take a lot of time to get this downloaded, but we'll see how it's going. It's been about 30 seconds and it says it's about 40% of the way through. So you can see that in the end it took just under 15 minutes to run through everything in my tenant. There isn't a great deal there, so it actually took a little bit longer than I was anticipating, and it managed to back up everything just with a few errors. And you can go in and take a look at what those errors are by going into the details. You can see what's failed, and you can see what's been partially successful in being backed up. So if we jump back over to overview, you can now see that we've got 36 OneDrives, 72 mailboxes, which includes 36 active mailboxes and 36 archive mailboxes, 46 SharePoint sites, etc, etc. So we have all of this stuff on our NAS now. So once we've completed a backup, we can actually jump into our apps here and we can head into the Active Backup for Microsoft 365 portal. And what you see here is we have a drop down for our different users and our groups. You can see we can choose different users and groups here. So I'm just going to stick with Adele for the time being. And then you can jump across different services. So right now I'm in Adele's OneDrive. I can jump across to Mail and see what's in there. I can jump across to SharePoint and see if there's anything in. I jump into Teams. You can see it jumps into viewing Demo Team 1, which is a team in my environment. You can see I can see the content that's in the standard channels. I can see content that's in private channels there. And down the bottom, I have the ability to scroll through different dates and take a look at what's in my environment on those different dates. So let's just jump into OneDrive. So let's take a look at this image file here. And you can see that by selecting it, I have the option either to restore it back into OneDrive, or I can export it. So if I export it, that actually just downloads it onto my computer, and I can open that up, and you can see it's actually this image here, one of the a cut down thumbnail. So you can see that I can actually select a whole bunch if I want to. I can restore them back into OneDrive, and I can do similar for if I jump over to Teams again, for example. I can go into my team, I can restore or export what I'm seeing in my team, and these are the messages that I'm seeing in the team. Obviously behind this there's going to be a SharePoint library. I've just jumped into the SharePoint site for demo team 1. You can see I can jump into documents, I can see what's in there, and if there's a document, there isn't actually anything in there right now, but I could do exactly the same thing. I could restore or export that document. So it's very easy to use, very straightforward, and you can actually delegate access to this to users in your environment if you want to. You want to give people access to go in and restore things themselves, or you could just keep it for an admin to do that. So as a tool, very straightforward, very easy to use, very easy to get into there and restore what it's backed up, which is one of the key criteria of having a good backup process. So you can really see how easy that is to get started with. Pretty much anyone could get themselves a NAS like this and be backing up their Microsoft 365 data in minutes. But you have to remember that by doing this, you've only bought the box and hard drives. There are lots of services provided by cloud vendors doing the same that are beyond that. If you're hosting data on site, you need to think about things like power protection and the physical security of your device, which are never your concern when you're cloud hosting your data. The problem with this solution, and with most of the cloud solutions and other backup solutions too, is that Microsoft 365 data is very complex. We saw how easy it is to grab a file from OneDrive or SharePoint and restore it to the cloud using your Synology. But what about a Power Automate flow? Even private Teams chats aren't covered by this solution. It's easy to think you have a backup turned on and you have everything covered. But that isn't correct, and I don't think this solution, nor any of the other solutions I've experienced, do enough to call this out. There are certain components of Microsoft 365 that it's simply impossible to back up using most of the tools on the market, and I highly doubt that even Microsoft's own solution when it comes to market will have robust backup tooling for literally everything in your tenant. Why is that? Because the data in Microsoft 365 is extraordinarily complex, and there aren't good APIs for manipulating all of it and getting it out. The companies that put together backup solutions like this are essentially entirely reliant on the tools that Microsoft has provided to get to and manipulate the data in your tenant. And where something is not manipulable or is undocumented, it's impossible for the vendor to be able to work with that. Also, in the cloud, things are changing all the time. There's new products all the time. There's different places to put your data all the time. And particularly with Microsoft 365, this doesn't always work in the same way that you might necessarily expect it to, where things have been stored before. So I can imagine that for the companies that are putting together these backup solutions, it's an incredibly tiresome effort to have to always be playing catch up to capture data that Microsoft has pushed into new products or new parts of products that weren't there before. So will we ever have something that completely backs up Microsoft 365 all the time? I think it's highly unlikely just because of the way these products now develop. But if you dig below the surface of Synology's documentation, it does provide a list of exclusions highlighting what it doesn't back up in the product it covers. But it doesn't highlight the variety of Microsoft 365 it doesn't work with at all. If you're expecting a backup of Forms or Planner, for example, you're out of luck. So is Synology a good solution? Based on my initial testing, I think it feels pretty good, but it certainly isn't comprehensive, but it's not significantly less comprehensive than many of its competitors that you might pay a great deal more for, particularly if you already have a Synology NAS on site. So even if you go out and buy a new NAS, is it cheaper than going out and buying a cloud-based solution instead? Well, depending on the amount of data you need, maybe. And if you already have that NAS, then just piggybacking this backup requirement on that is definitely going to be a cheaper solution. If you're going to go and buy a NAS specifically for this, then I think there are probably better solutions depending on exactly how much data you have and what you need to do. I already have a cloud-based backup of my Microsoft 365 tenant, but given that I now have this box anyway, I see no harm in turning on its backup too. In a lot of cases, this might be the best approach, as even with a single cloud-based backup, having a copy of most of your data on-site with you isn't a bad idea. Still, remember your approach to backup should be connected with the risks you are trying to manage. So far as I'm aware, there is no tool that provides 100% backup coverage for everything in Microsoft 365, but there are tools that make greater promises about what they cover than Active Backup on Synology does. Do your homework, reach out to experts on this if you need, and make sure you have what you need backed up well in advance of finding you need it. Thanks for watching through to the end. I hope this was useful to you, although a little different than the videos I usually make. Until the next video, bye bye.